The Creative Writer's Way.
Writing is fundamental. It is our way. From stories come history. From history comes belonging. From belonging comes a sense of where we were, where we are, and where we are going. This is the foundation of civilization.
This is Dr. Skyler Madison. Find your story at skylermadison.com.
Hello, this is Dr. Skyler Madison Fontana, and you're listening to The Creative Writer's Way. And today we will be speaking with William Whitecloud, who has some fascinating information to share with us. If you believe in magic, he's the author of The Magician's Way, what it really takes to find your treasure, and The Last Shaman, both fascinating stories. William, welcome.
Thank you, Skyler, and hello to all the magicians out there.
So your life has certainly been a fascinating one. To start off, could you tell us, just shed some light on or share with us a little bit about your backstory, what you do, and how you were called to do this work? I know it's 3 questions, but you can have some fun with it.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I do is not really, magic. I mean, it is in a sense. But, I mean, my work is creative development. So I own a business that runs creative development trainings around the world, and my business is called Natural Success. So the premise of natural success is just simply that the higher your level of creativity, the higher your level of natural success. So if you just, take me 10 seconds to explain that, is...
Yeah, please.
If you look at academically, if you look at how levels of creativity are delineated, you get something like unskilled imitation, skilled imitation, low-level derivative, high-level derivative, innovative, inventive, and genius. And in that ascending order, what you'll notice is that the higher the level of creativity, the lower the outer reference. So the more creative you become on that scale, you're just more self-referenced. You're more internally referenced, you see.
Oh.
And so what I do is literally teach people to connect with their genius. And so that's actually what I do. And so my reference to shamanism and magic and all of that, which are in my book titles and even in the book content, they're allegorical novels, and it's just using those metaphors to get across my message of high level, functioning on a high level creative frequency, basically. And that's what I do, and that's really, honestly, what I'm about. And it is pretty magical, though. I mean, the more inner referenced you are, the closer you rise to the sun of your genius, then the more magical life becomes, as I'm sure you and everyone out there knows, really.
Well, I don't know if everyone knows this, honestly, but I will ask you a question. What do you mean by inner referenced? And I have some thoughts about, what they call our genius, our muse, and whatever, which I'll share with you too. But tell me what you mean by inner referenced.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, it's what you know for yourself without being informed by what's outside of you. So, you can call that instinct or intuition or whatever you like. But within you is a superconscious side of us that is of us that is connected to everything through all time and space. And
got it.
Okay. So. What I work with and train other people to do is to connect with the superconscious side of themselves and work from that. And, I also teach writing. I write, and I've written a few bestsellers, and I also, teach writing on the side, and it's good fun because I only teach writing on retreat in Africa, and we go to usually beautiful location in Mozambique and spend 10 days there, and and so then I teach people how to tap into their superconscious, and we even use often the premise of the muse and as an imaginative vehicle of the superconscious, and call it the muse. And it's a place you go where you don't try and work it out, where it's already been worked out for you, and you get the message from there, and then your job is just to really just write it out, transcribe it, I guess is the word. And yeah.
So superconscious side, I guess there are other words for it too. Having studied Jungian psychology, I guess the corollary is the unconscious and the collective unconscious. And I think that's just a different way of putting the same,
Well, that's right. There's the more traditional ancient terminology. I mean, it just depends on your model and the languaging of that model. But But more in line with kind of the ancient Greeks is there's the unconscious, which in my terminology and theirs, because not mine, I inherited it. The unconscious is more your egoic belief systems, that side of you, your self-conscious, your waking, conscious, and then there's your superconscious, which the Jungian correspondent is the collective unconscious, say. And when Jungians come to my talks and that, they initially react very badly because they hear the term unconscious applied to what you'd call kind of the negative side of us or the dysfunctional side of us. So they're very attached to their terminology. So they get up in arms about that, and I have to settle them down and go, no, it's just languaging and,
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. It's really true. So, Jung said, and one of the things I've noticed, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, and you're already saying it, that a lot of our stories emerge from our personal psychology. We write what we know, what matters to us, and what drew you to writing, and do you start with a character or plot? How do you get your ideas, if you don't mind me tapping into that?
Well, to be honest, what I teach people, and I believe myself and practice myself and actually support people, is to not write what you know. I actually believe that what you know, nobody else wants to know. It's the formula of disaster. It's actually the formula of disaster. Nobody's interested in what you know, and really, honestly, that's a fact. I give talks on writing, and I'll talk to a room of 300 people, and 80% of the people there want to write an autobiography, and they think
a memoir.
Their life is they think boring. Their life is interesting, that what they know is interesting, and it's not just me. I think Stephen Pressfield, one of the greatest writers ever, and one of the greatest writing teachers ever. And the last book I read of his was titled "Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit."
Exactly. No, I know.
Yeah. So where we start is in the unknown, is not knowing anything, and so that's then you have to go into the methodology of how I teach people to connect with their superconscious. Because you don't connect with your superconscious from what you know. It's beyond what you know. And so you have to go into not knowing. You have to go into not knowing. And then when you go into not knowing, information's going to occur to you from the unknown, from the collective unconscious, as you'd call it, or Jung would call it. And information is going to occur to you, but it doesn't occur to you in rational, plain sense in your native tongue, English or whatever. it comes to you symbolically, and then you've got to unpack the symbolism, and you've got to know how to unpack the subtle energy of your genius, and it's really a function, you know, of making it up. So you make it up. So, like from that perspective, you know, like that's really like, as far as, you know, we have a lot of evidence of, that's where your genius resides. It doesn't reside in what you know. So from your own experience or from what you think, it's not from what you know. You go somewhere where you don't know anything, and you get the story.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the process of getting the story, which I love, of getting the information, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is making it up. You know, that's the translation process of the symbolism into rational sense, is a translation that is made by making it up, you know, and so you make it up, and that's what I love about it. You know, it's the philosopher's secret fire, or the philosopher's stone, you know, of alchemy, which is actually a metaphor for the imagination. Our bridge to our genius is our imagination. So you make it up, and then out of nothing comes something, and it comes out. So the way I write and the way I teach people to write is just to be a channel for their genius, and so that's my method.
And I think that you could say, and I think you would say, is that genius lies within everyone. It's really just a question of the genius has the capacity to access it, where someone who doesn't can learn, so to speak.
Everybody's a genius, and people who tell you that they're not a genius are just using their imagination to imagine that they're not geniuses. You know?
Or they don't understand what it is, I guess.
Yeah, well, they just haven't, you know, it's like saying, I can't ride a bicycle. You just haven't been taught to ride a bicycle, you know. So, yeah.
But in the two novels that you wrote, there were aspects, I think, of your own story in there, told in a fictional way. Because, you know, the whole thing is, if we just tell our story, I mean, that can be boring, but not that yours was, but a lot of people, it has to be told in a way that we tell stories. You know, the hero protagonist has a goal, and there's conflict and challenge, and there is this, you know, crisis, and then transformation. You know, you learn through the whole process, and then you come to some kind of resolution. It sounds as if, just having read about your books, and I'm going to read them, they're just fascinating to me, that there were aspects of your life within them. Is that true, or?
Yeah, I mean that's true, but that's not the genius part of the books, you know. I mean,
Exactly.
You know, they're not my story. They're not. The big mistake is that when people meet me, they think that that the characters or the protagonist, the main character, is based on me and based on my life, but it's not.
Right.
You know, I'm not that person. I don't have that personality type. I've actually not have had that experience. Like, for instance, in the first allegorical novel I wrote, which was the big, you know, bestseller, is The Magician's Way, and Mark Vail is the protagonist of that book. And he's quite a prudish guy, and he goes into you know, quite a conflicted situation in the book, where he's confronted with kind of you know, nudity and you know, sexual tension and whatever. And that's not my story. I grew up in a country called Swaziland, which is a little, you know, African kingdom that borders South Africa, and in a time that South Africa was very repressed. You know, the Beatles were banned in South Africa, right? There was no nudity, there was no flesh shown, there were no strip joints. There was, you know, it was like a puritanical society, but all of those people used to cross over to the border and come to strip clubs and brothels and everything in Swaziland. So I grew up like when I was at school. You'd sit in a burger joint and there'd be people, the girls stripping. You know what I mean? So that was,
that's fascinating.
It's not my, you know. But I mean, it's unavoidable that I think aspects of your story and your life are, you know, come into the setting of
exactly.
Yeah,
it's what you saw and what you came to know, and I don't want to without researching it.
I don't want to you know, avoid that, but it's not the genius of the book, of the twists and turns and the stories and the character types and that, or the lessons, you know, because even when I write my books, I mean, I end up writing completely different books than I set out to write, that I think I know about, and that, you know, I because if you go into a superconscious realm, you gain wisdom well beyond what you currently know, and I think that's the beauty of it. And I always say to people, you know, if you write a book, if you sit down to write a book, and you write the book that you sat down to write, you have failed. You have failed because you have just written that book rationally. You have not gone to any genius in you. You just, you know, yeah.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that you're so right on about this, that the creative process has a magic in and of itself that one has to just go with. And I think you would probably agree with me, this is one of the things I found, is that focused attention is one of the ways that we access the creative genius within. And so that what we're focusing on, you know, with attention and passion, that's when we start to get these kind of inspired thoughts that just arise out of nowhere, or even upon awakening, you might have remember a dream that had something to do with what you're writing about. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. If I am right about what I think you're saying, you see, the whole thing of structure, you know. Often people don't like structure, and you know, that's a problem. They think it's a good thing, but it's a very bad thing, really. Because although you know, as I said, if you write a book and you write the book that you set out to write, you've actually failed, and that might imply that you go outside of structure, but you don't. In fact, structure is what gets you there, and you know, the important thing, I think, and what I do and what I teach people to do is when they write, is to have a focus on end results, on qualities that you want. You know, it's like, well, this is the theme. I think it's very important to have a theme and really be aware of the heart of what you're writing about. Not what it's about. Like, you know, people say to me, I'm going to write a book, and I say to them, what's it about? And they go, well, it's about the time you know, I had an incurable illness and I went through all that, and then I was cured. And I go, well, that's not what it's about. That's the setting.
Right.
But what is it about at heart? You know, and you really have to know that. I read a book by the guy who sold more $1 million scripts than anybody in Hollywood ever in history. And he said if it takes him 2 months just to come up with a one-sentence theme, you know, a phrase, and if that took him 2 months, just that to do, he thinks that that's worth his time because that's the money. That idea, that clarity of heart of what it's about is what writes it. And it is. It's because that is something that a vein inside you that you or in the muse or whatever that you tapped into that writes itself. So starting with the theme, and then any other qualities that you would love to bring to the offering you've got to stay focused on those and conscious of those, and that's what you hold. That's what you're rigid about. That's what you hang on to. You see, and then you let that guides the offering, and it writes itself. But it is a focused endeavor. But it's not in the way people think, really. It kind of turns it upside down a bit.
Mm-hmm. So theme is the throughway into the, kind of like the unfolding of the story. And by the way, what was the book that you wrote that read that you referenced? I'm curious who sold more.
I can't even. I'm really apologize. I'm unprepared. I can't even think who it is.
You'll think of it.
Just Google who's written the most $1 million scripts.
James
it's just
Cameron?
something I read.
No, not James Cameron.
Huh?
Yeah.
No.
James Cameron?
I mean, he's written the biggest, blockbusters of all time, but he doesn't hold the record for selling the most scripts over $1 million.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about the person who's written the most scripts that he sold for over $1 million. Yeah.
Got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. And what about the dream world? Because a lot of what you're talking, do you have an active dream world? Do you receive creative messages? They come to us symbolically, and we have to interpret them.
No.
Do you have that?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm not interested. I'm not saying there's I think that there's a lot of merit in dreams, and I'm aware of people authors, and then also friends of mine who kind of use dreams as a model. It's not my model. It's not my vehicle. I don't use meditation. I don't use yoga. I don't use dreams. I use imagination actively in my life as I write or as I do whatever I'm doing, So I'm just into active imagination, and the rest I don't care about,
Oh, that's so funny. That's one of Jung's terms, but yeah, that's a Jungian term. He came up with a therapeutic process called active imagination, but I think it's different than what we think it is, and I'll tell you what it is in a minute. But so tell me how explain that to me a little bit more. How do you access a superconscious state and actively use your imagination?
Well, by going outside of what I know, by going into innocence. It's an interesting word, innocence. It's not based on. The word is not based on these words at all, but it's just a really amazing coincidence that it means that, because if you break innocence down, it says in no sense, right? Now that's not the origin of the word, but it's funny that that's what it says, in no sense.
No
it means
sense.
Outside your senses, outside thoughts and feelings. Because your thoughts and feelings don't reflect anything other than your beliefs, your definitions, your experience, and so your concepts, and so suspending the ability to suspend your perception, which is your mode of awareness, through thoughts and feelings. A lot of modes of awareness are conscious, but perception is the self-conscious awareness where you experience reality through your thoughts and feelings. And innocence is where you suspend your thoughts and feelings, and you arrive at that state by not needing to know anything, and not needing, suspending the need to know, suspending the need to understand. Doesn't mean you don't understand things or you don't know things. It just means you suspend the need to know, and so and then you go into a state of mind that is informed outside outside of your egoic, framework.
Right.
So if you look at it, I mean, I'll just say something interesting. That again, I think a lot of people know this, but our brains apparently process 400 billion bits of information every second. But we're only self-consciously aware of 2,000 of those bits of information, right, at any second. So 2,000 bits out of 400 billion bits is a fraction. You'd have to agree, you see. And what you can be sure of is those 2,000 bits are the same 2,000 bits that you're always aware of. You're being herded into a view and a perception. Your attention is being trained, and going into innocence takes you outside of what your attention is trained on and opens to a much more inspired, creative state of mind. And it's interesting, Skyler, that the very word creativity, what does it mean?
Yes.
It means making connections that aren't normally made, you see. I mean, that's quite amazing. So you go into innocence, and suddenly the world opens up to you, and you see, because when we say people are creative, they're a creative photographer, we mean, that's a perspective. I wouldn't have taken a picture like that. I wouldn't have seen that frame like that,
Right.
I wouldn't have captured it from that angle. I wouldn't have in that light or whatever. That's really creative because that person has that ability.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the connectivity, exactly. And so innocence takes you into connectivity, and where and what you connect with, you connect with your genius. So it's a beautiful thing. But it's also you've got to direct it. If you just go in there and open it, and can also be just like a soup, because a lot of people come to me with works that they call channeled, and they just dribble. They're just garbage, absolute garbage. They all start the same. We are going through chaotic times now, but that's all right because this is meant to be, because we're evolving to a new blah blah. I've read 100 channeled manuscripts, and page one of every one of them is the same, and it's boring drivel,
Because it does not follow the precepts of story structure, which is basically unconsciously embedded into us. And what reason why we respond to a story is because it's told in a certain way. It's not formulaic. It's archetypal. If you agree with that,
I mean,
that word.
I 100% agree with that. And even nonfiction is a story, and you've got to write nonfiction as a story. You're absolutely right about that. And these people aren't writing a story; they're writing garbage. Because first of all, they're not writing those archetypal, structures, and secondly, they're not actually channeling anything. They're actually just telling you what they know anyway. We all know it, you see. And I think one of the big things about creativity and writing and entertainment and all of that, it's got to have a conceit, meaning that it's got to, the way the brain filters information, they're filters of what we retain. And I think if memory serves me, I haven't got my graph here, my picture of this, my illustration of this, because I have it somewhere, of how information comes to the brain. And there are about 7 filters that have got to survive each one of these filters then to be retained by your brain. And do you know that the very first one, I know that much, is, do we know this already or not? Because if we know it already, we don't need to know it again. It's going to be a waste of energy to relearn this. The brain catalogs information for convenience, and it doesn't want to know. That's why, I mean, there's not many books you'll read over and over again. There are some that have some kind of quality, but generally we read a book and that's it, we're done, because we've read it. I don't want to go and see the movie where I know he's going to fall off the horse at this point and all that. I want that to be a surprise. So with these, books and people that I'm talking about, there's no surprise. We all know it. You know, if I'd heard that in the 80s, it would have been a surprise. I would have gone, wow, yeah.
Right. So just to, kind of put a little bit of completion on this, and then I just wanted to move into your other world where you're coaching people as well on the creative process in terms of creating things in their life. But would you say that you start with your theme, and does that lead you to what I would call the story's premise? Who's the protagonist? What do they want? What's stopping them? And who's the antagonist? Is that something that you feel you need to?
If it's a story, I'm much more simple. I go, you have to have a theme, and that's what is this at heart,
Exactly.
It's like Cheryl Strayed's book Wild, you read the story and it starts down on the Mexican border in the Mojave Desert kind of thing, and it ends up like she goes on the Pacific Trail on a hike and ends up near Canada somewhere, or maybe on the Canadian border, whatever. And that's the journey. But that's not what the book's about. That's the setting. The book's about the loss and regaining of substance. When you meet that woman, she has no substance whatsoever, and then you learn about how she lost her substance. And then she regains it on the trail, and that's what it's about, So and I think she knew that. I mean, she clearly knew that, see. And so that was the theme of her book that she was addressing, and she knew that, and she expressed it beautifully. I mean, wow, genius.
Yeah.
So you've got to know your theme, and then I have a premise. My version of a premise is different. Yeah. And it comes from transformational, creative development. And the way we use a premise, what a premise means to us is how something works. How does this work? So, like if you take if you take Robert Kiyosaki's book Rich Dad Poor Dad, the theme was wealth creation, about making money.
Yes.
But the premise was how does this work? How does this work? And how it works is rich people have money work for them, and poor people work for money. That's how it works. That's the premise. So it has a thesis. Rich people have money work for them. It has an antithesis, which is poor people work for money. That's how it works.
Right.
And I believe that even a novel must have a premise. And I believe I can find, you give me any novel, I'll read it. I'll tell you what the theme is, and I'll tell you what the premise is. Because a really good novel will, anyway, even if it's intuitively, it will have a theme and a premise that will be honest and held to all the way through the book. It won't be about
and they're integrally related. They're integrally.
Yeah, that won't won't be about anything else other than that theme and premise.
Right.
And I mean, there are other things, qualities, and that you come up with that you want, but if you're talking, you see, it's different. I could talk about this for hours, and I do. That's why I have a 10-day retreat in Mozambique. But
which you're going to tell us about in a little bit. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm actually not, because I'm not running any at the moment. But anyway.
Okay.
But in terms of storytelling, if it's fiction, I believe, and I'll just say this very quickly. I believe that all you need for fiction is you must have your theme, and you must have your premise, and you must have a character, you must have a dynamic character, and you must have an opponent. You cannot write without being clear about who they are.
Right.
And then you must know what a story is, and you must know that what a story is someone or some group of people. But let's talk about one person. Someone's life comes into imbalance, and they set about to restore the imbalance in their lives. That's what a story is, and you can analyze it any way you like. You can't ever define that being a story of a person's life coming into imbalance. You never read a book. You never went to a movie where it started with a person's life being rosy. Then they got married, and it was a really happy wedding, and then they went on a very happy honeymoon, and they came back, and they had some children and lived happily ever after. That's not a story. A story
right.
has imbalance.
I've never heard it said that way, but I think you're completely right. And that's the first time I've ever heard it framed that way, but that's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, if you know that, you see, if you know that and you put that into your consciousness, if I say to myself, and I sit down to write a book and I say to myself, this is what this is about. It's about the loss and regaining of substance, you see. And who's my character? Well, me. Me walking the Pacific Trail. Who's my opponent? My mother, who screwed me up. And who's my dynamic character? Well, my ex-husband, who comes in and out of my life to reflect, my growth as I go along. So, so there's me. I'm my main character. I've got my opponent. I've got my dynamic character.
Yes.
And so let me start with my life in imbalance. What is my imbalance? And let me portray that from the beginning. And now let's go. And my imagination will come together to put all of that together more geniusly than I could ever work out. Because my imagination is tapped into the DNA of storytelling, right? It
exactly.
knows. We don't have to go to school to learn it. When we go to school to learn writing, they just teach us what people wrote who didn't learn how to write. So we learn how to write from people who didn't learn how to write. I mean, what the hell is that about? You know what I mean?
And they teach us craft, too.
That means they're not teaching us to write, because the people that we study through history that were brilliant writers didn't study writing. They studied, generally, education in those days was mainly, what you actually studied was Neoplatonic philosophy, which is one of the main strands of alchemy. So what they studied was the application of the imagination. They knew the right use and technique of using imagination, and that's why they were brilliant painters, storytellers, poets, military tacticians, whatever. Yeah. And then we're looking at, the arc of their stories and the inciting incidents, or, whatever it is, and go, look at how they did it. Yeah. And those guys didn't know what an inciting incident was. They didn't know what a dynamic character was. They didn't know nothing.
Well, it came naturally to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a function of doing it. Yeah. Because that's what happens. Wow. William, you have so much to share, and this has been so incredibly enlightening. Would you share with everybody how they can find you and what it is that you are doing that you want to share? How can people connect with you, and what it is that you're doing that you might want someone to connect with?
Well, it's embarrassing, but you can't connect with me, even if you want to, or if I wanted you to, because my website's down. We're putting up some online platforms at the moment, so my website's down. Okay. Having that put up. And, otherwise you can follow me on Facebook. William Whitecloud on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. Okay. And, I would, really, to be honest, and then, if someone follows me on Facebook, whether it's my author page or whether it's my personal page, which you can follow, then you'll be alerted to what I'm up to and when I'm up to it. Exactly. And say, look out. I highly recommend people read the books that we've been referring to, The Magician's Way, The Last Shaman. They're good books. The Magician's Way was #1 on Amazon overall, not in a category, right? So, it's a solid book, and it's entertaining, and it covers, all of the principles we've talked about today are covered in those books. And a forthcoming book I have, The Secrets of Natural Success, which really goes into detail about all of this, and that's a non-fiction book. And yeah, that's what I'd recommend. And thanks for giving me the platform, by the way. Yeah.
This has been fabulous. I have so enjoyed it, and a lot of what you talk about are things that I have studied, but you talk about them in a almost a very practical, accessible way that just is really, frankly, brilliant. So I have to thank you so much for this.
Well, I've studied and practiced it for 25 years, so, you know, I'm starting to get a handle on what it's all about. But it's been lovely talking to you, too. Thanks. And thanks for prompting, you know, like my me to get excited about my most favorite thing in the world, you know. Yes.
And perhaps some of these books will become films, and you're moving into filmmaking, and that's certainly also an area that I'm in. My husband being a producer, and you know, so we should talk more, because I can see, you know, that those type of things, you know, that we're talking about and what you've written about in that arena as well.
Well, let's get together for a coffee. We just, you know, we're having this conversation, strangely enough, not even a mile apart.
I know. William, thank you so much. It's just been, I would say, a brilliant synchronicity that our paths have crossed, and we have a lot of things to look forward to, both of us, in terms of what we're doing, and, you know, the brilliance of what you're talking about. I just can't even. It's just been fabulous. Thank you so much, and to be continued.
Awesome, Skyler. Thanks a lot, and thanks for listening, everyone out there. And magic be with you all.
Magic. Thank you.
The Creative Writer's Way.
To touch the reader inside is to tap into where we live. It is common to us all. It is unique to us all. Finding that path is the hero's journey. The journey begins with you.
This is Dr. Skyler Madison. Find your story at SkylerMadison.com.